hear the sound of my own voice for the next 35 minutes. Okay, as he sets up my computer, I'll just sort of give you a little bit of background about myself. I'm a teacher from Louisville, Kentucky. I taught English, language arts at the high school level. Got really interested in literacy. Was really interested in, I guess the way digital media was changing literacy and what digital media and technology was doing to learning, or potentially do to learning. So I started writing about it a little bit, and then I got involved with some sites, and then eventually became TeachTalk, which is what I do today. So I appreciate everybody coming this morning. What I'm going to talk about really is the kinds of changes that the iPad suggests and what the iPad or any tablet does to the learning process. So instead of, you're going to have a lot of great sessions yesterday and today, I'm sure, about tools and apps and things like that. And those are fantastic, and those are the most accessible, the most interesting, and the most fun to browse for, the most fun to download and then delete if it didn't do what you thought you wanted it to do. Those are great, but what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is what it does to learn, what the iPad itself does to learn. So, see, now I'm a little bit of an outsider here. This is an iPad conference. I've got the Chromebook here. And this is the Nexus. I've got an Android phone in my pocket. But I love Apple. Usually. Okay, also, in my experience as a teacher, this is my first live presentation, so I may not be as polished and charismatic as this. You see, okay, so characteristics of an iPad-friendly classroom. First, I've already covered this really. It's the point of this session is to talk about how the iPad changes learning and what kind of adjustments you should make to your teaching, curriculum, planning, collaboration, assessment. That's really the point of the session. What does the iPad change, and how can you design your classroom to be more friendly to accommodate that little one device from California? But it always is helpful for me to start off at the beginning at the broadest level, most macro level, and that is, what's the point of school? What's the point of teachers, and what's the point of learning? If we can take a step back, instead of focusing on the device itself, but look at it in its more natural context. And that would be, a classroom most immediately to you, but for a student, school means something a little bit different. So if school means something different, the classroom means something different, then the iPad is going to actuate something different for them than you might want it to. And it's going to do something a little bit different in terms of what the administrator in your school wants it to do. So everybody, learning environment is kind of it's an ecology that's constantly changing. And so if you take a step back and think, well, what's the point of school? Well, I would guess it would be to learn academic proficiency, mastery of Common Core standards, being able to read and write. But what about things like self-knowledge, understanding yourself, learning how to find and evaluate information and use information? What about the ability to generate original ideas from multiple sources of information? None of this stuff is in standards, and it's probably not in a lot of your PLC or data team meetings, but it matters. And that's the kind of stuff that kids come to school for, besides their friends, is to understand how to find information and use it in a way to solve authentic problems for them. Well, we don't typically think of those sorts of things when we think of Common Core standards, when we think of proficiency, or we think of data, or when we think of iPads. But if you think of the broader context of school, what the iPad means for kids is different than what it might mean for you. And so sometimes it can help you to take a step back and say, well, what's the point of all this? These are some of the answers that came to my mind when I thought, what is the point of school? Top right is probably one of the more important ones. Grant Wiggins talks a lot about transfer, the ability to use information in a new and unfamiliar context. So instead of just being able to pass the test and do well in terms of the assessment that you design, can a kid transfer understanding of this thing from this situation that's probably well scaffolded to something that they've never seen before? And can that be self-initiated? Can they do that on their own without being prompted, without being reminded, hey, don't forget to use that strategy, or hey, don't forget to use this idea? So self-initiated transfer, bottom right, connectedness, self-knowledge, active proficiency, and then in black, I would be a little bit brighter than that. Understanding. So these are some of the points of school, and the iPad can help. So, real quick, I was hoping you guys could take 30, 45 seconds, turn to an local partner, and, well, there's no blank, fill in the dots. Learning happens when. So, just think for a second. In your most successful lessons, your most successful units, whatever activities that you've done, when do you really notice that learning really happens? Learning happens when what? Learning happens when what? So go ahead and take 30 seconds to turn to the partner. Any volunteers who want to share what their neighbors said? Or I can pick them. Okay.
I suppose I'm on the spot first. I said learning happens when a desire to know aligns with a way to know.
That's pretty good. A desire to know, when people talk about one of the foundations of project-based learning is building projects around a need to know. So instead of delivering more efficiently, cramming information down their throats, it's more how can you establish that need to know, and then how can you surround it with the right kinds of technologies and resources and networks to allow them to do that. And so the iPad can help there. Anybody else have anything? 8:30 in the morning.
Just when students are engaged.
Students are engaged. Okay. Now, what does it look like when students engage?
Everybody is working on the same thing.
Every student's engaged. Does engagement look the same for all students? No. Do all? Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. It's my Google. It senses the disturbance in the force. Hello? Hello? Okay. Oh yeah, engagement doesn't look the same for all students, clearly. Not all students have to be. Not all students have to be sitting, staring, locked eyes with you, nodding their head exactly when you would expect them to. Not all engagement looks the same for all students, so that's a good point. Moving along. So we've talked about what's the point of school, what's the point of learning. We've talked about engagement and learning happens when. So where does that fit in? And that's either a giant hand or that's not very many. But where does that fit in? That's why you're here. What does this have to do with, if you talk about wisdom and self-knowledge and deep understanding and critical thinking and transfer, and what's the point of school, and different kids come to school for different reasons than adults, than administrators, and the superintendent. Well, so what does this device have to do with all of that?
I don't know, actually.
Okay, so we'll get to that, hopefully. So let's take a step back and talk about trends in learning real quick. Let's just a quick show of hands, I guess. Raise your hand about halfway if you think learning trends are kind of cool. Trends in learning in general, because some teachers are very, well, I don't want to give it away, but halfway up if you think learning trends are cool, all the way up if you think learning trends are awesome. Don't raise your hand at all if you're kind of sick of hearing about trends in learning. See, there's a lot of diversity. And there are a lot of people with their hands down. And I think that's kind of cool. Because clearly there's no one, you're going to probably be told, and you already have if you're a teacher, you're going to be told that good learning looks like this. And good teaching looks like this. So you need to use this in this way because that's what Marzano says, and that's what Grant Wiggins says, and that's what, this is what good teaching and learning looks like, so do it. And there is no one way. Because if there was one way to learn properly, we would already have, the Rubik's Cube would already be solved. And we would just have to duplicate that effort. But every single school and classroom student is their own independent and unique ecology. And so what 21st century learning is about in many ways is adapting the learning to the student and not the other way around. We're forcing them to adapt to us. So it's good that not everybody thinks that trends in learning are awesome. And a lot of the trends in learning are just about repackaged or recycled old ideas that worked well the first time. So let's get to, these are some of the trends. Only half are legible, so that's convenient. Tablets, the cloud, mobile learning, big data, the flipped classroom, learning simulations, blended learning, self-directed learning. There's lots more. These are some of the things that are in education that are happening right now that are changing, disrupting, making administrators uncomfortable, exciting teachers, costing districts a lot of money. These are some of those trends. And they're not always doing what they were designed to do, but that's kind of the nature of disruption. And we'll get to how technology disrupts learning. I've got too many slides. All right, here we go. See, sorry. So one takeaway from all these trends is that technology is disrupting education. Now, disruption, you might hear about that, and you might not have, it might be confusing to you, because when I first heard it, I thought it was a bad thing. But then when you want something that's, in general, I know we as teachers work as hard as we can, but I think it's pretty evident that in general, public education is tragically mediocre across the board. So if, I'm not saying your classroom is, but in general, we do a pretty poor job compared to the resources that we spend, compared to the technology that we have, and compared to the intelligence and the expertise of each one of you. The net result at the end of every school year isn't perhaps what we would like to. And so you think disrupting something like that might be a good thing, because we've striven for efficiency for the last 50 or 80 years, and hasn't gotten us too much further than where we used to be. So, these trends, these trends, big data, mobile learning simulations, these trends are all evidence of something. And I thought that was interesting. About 8 months ago, I wrote an article about, instead of about the trends, I thought, well, what do all these trends indicate? They imply something, like there's a cause and effect. So let's look at the trends not as a cause, not that they're causing something, but that they're an effect. So there's something happening, and then these trends are the output. And so the fact that there are all these trends, what does that mean? What does that imply? Why? Where are all these, and then why are they multiplying like gremlins now? Why now are all these trends exploding? It didn't seem like for so many decades, learning was kind of the same. The biggest egg reform movements were standards or content-based. And now we're talking about self-directed learning. Something like that, would have been unheard of 50 years ago. And at least on the level that we talk about today, enabled by technology. So these trends, what do they indicate? Well, they indicate new roles. Teachers as facilitators, teachers as coaches, teachers as collaborators, teachers as members of global learning networks, and not just data teams and professional learning communities, but your community is global. Your kids can be connected globally. So we have new roles for teachers and new roles for principals. Administrators might suggest an app instead of a learning strategy. And that's very different. They're going to give you, they can offer you tools and they can offer you pedagogy. So new roles, new content. The second one right there is being roles and evidence, says content. Black on but new content. Math changes. If the world changes, then the math changes. English language arts changes. Literacy changes. Social studies changes. Everything changes. As the information, the world that we're expecting students to use information in changes, well then the content should change as well. Not just the actuators of the content. But, and some people say, well, reading and writing and math don't change, but they do. Especially, and if they're not, then that can be part of the problem. These things need to change because the ecology that you're expecting students to unfold it from the classroom floor and take it into the real world, it changes. Well, so then that needs to change too. Or you're demanding an extraordinary amount of transfer on the part of them. For them to take something that's packaged very academically, and you may have diced it up like an expert chef, and it may be perfectly, it may be perfect in terms of your local PLC or data team or what your principal expects, but then you're expecting them to really radically repackage that information using the real world. And so, content does kind of change. New evidence of learning. What we expect, or what we accept rather, is evidence of learning has changed as well. It's no longer, well, in some schools sometimes the pressure of accountability has kind of returned it to, it is about bar graphs and bumping the bar graph. We want lots of blue, we want lots of distinguish. We got to move these prints to the fish. And I think I'm going to identify these that are right on the cut score, we got to move them to proficiency. And instead of, I'm going to teach students how to generate original ideas from multiple sources of information. You have to look at that. I have these standards and I have this master that I have to reach this semester because I'm on the clock and my data team, put my data on the screen, it's got to be right. That's an interesting conundrum that teachers have to reconcile. Every unit. New access, and that's probably the biggest place that the iPad comes in, is in accessing. And what does it access and what does it actuate? It changes everything. It changes the whole game. You go a little bit quicker. This is stages of technology, integration and learning that we did at Teach Thought about 8 months ago. And we were interested in taking a look at, well, it moves left to right. At the very beginning, the first stage of the integration of technology and learning, so that the first thing that it would do here, at the first stage is learners would be directed in their use of technology. So you're going to give the kid an iPad, and you're going to tell them what app to use, and you're going to tell them what they should do, and you're going to tell them what acceptable evidence of understanding looks like, and you're going to just, and they're going to be in a group, and they're probably going to be using similar apps and similar tablets, probably iPads, and everything is going to be the same. You're kind of telling them what to do, and you're just giving them some super cool, pinchy, and zoomy thing that can actuate it all, right? Stage 2 would be characterized by access. So instead of telling them what to do, well, you're giving students keys to unlock the barn door, throw it open, and walk into this digital world to be able to do cool stuff, but you're still not giving them a lot of autonomy. You're still not giving them a lot of choice and voice. You're beginning to give them access. Third stage would be mobility. And then it says without mobile technology arose the traditional classrooms, mobile learners should disrupt a non-flexible curriculum. So essentially at this stage of technology integration, you have students that are mobile. And that doesn't just mean walking around the classroom, moving from one corner to the next. And it doesn't necessarily mean just going down the hall to work with another classroom either. And the idea of mobile learning and the logistics of that's a different conversation, but that would be the third stage. And then the fourth stage is self-directed learning. And it says that the final stage of technology necessitates learners to consistently self-direct critical core components of learning experiences. but it's amazing. If you've ever seen some of these videos that are charged with rhetoric and misleading music and things like that, but if you've seen some of these things on the internet, what a kid can do with just an internet connection and a network of people is really, really amazing. You have to unleash them, and it's difficult. Difficult to do. Okay, so the takeaway there would be self-direction. If we're looking at that as the final say, and this is subjective, obviously, this is not the final word, but if you accept this, at least for this moment, that this might be somewhat accurate, well, then the ultimate stage of technology will be self-directed learning, where a student can have this portal to the universe sitting in their laps, and we just have to help them use that consistently, even when we're not around. Versus, I'm going to plan everything, now go do this, and project it on the screen, we'll make a video, and we'll put it on YouTube, and everybody will celebrate our 21st century. And it doesn't always work out that way. Digital citizenship is something that comes part and parcel with the iPad and any piece of technology. Anytime you're connected to another computer, you're connected to another person, another group of people, and then that idea of citizenship, which is interesting because it hasn't been discussed much over the last 100 years, but we break out computers and suddenly people are all citizens again. So that's a good thing, I guess. We have a definition here. Equality, this is one definition. The equality, the digital citizenship is equality of habits, actions, and consumption patterns. Those of you that are checking your Facebook right now. That impact the ecology of digital content communities. So basically, it's the quality of the stuff kids do that impacts the content communities that they depend on. So that would be one way of looking at digital citizenship, is how their habits, their input, what they say, what they do, how often they check it, whatever their actuating habits are, how that impacts the very stuff that they depend on every day, the very networks that they plug into, whether it's social media, whether it's direct networks through texting, how their habits impact that stuff in the internet at large. So it's not just about a global digital footprint, but it's about the communities and caretaking the communities and students being plugged into communities that they don't care about, and that give them the type of stuff that they need on a moment-by-moment basis. Because that's why we like the internet. That's why we like social media. Because at any moment we can plug in and do whatever we want, and it's kind of selfish, and it's made me a selfish little user when it comes to being able to use these tablets. Like at any moment, I Google things all the time. I Google everything. And that's really troubling to me sometimes. Sometimes I won't Google, but it's like I don't remember phone numbers anymore because they're all on my phone. So if somebody asked me today, what's your wife's phone number? And I'm like, I didn't know. And so they said, she's your wife. I said, she is. But I don't remember the phone. And so what are we forgetting because of Google? But then the tempting takeaway there, low-hanging fruit would be, well, they don't use Google. No, but things are changing, right? And so that same sort of, you want to check your Facebook, and you want to check your Twitter, and you want to see chat messaging you. And right now, we're not, I have to tell you this, email, iPad, hashtag, anyway, but you could have used that. But I want to check that kind of stuff right now, and so it almost rewires your brain a little bit too. And digital citizenship has something to do with all of that. When your brain rewires, well, how should you respond to maintain those digital communities that you care so much about, or that you don't care about? I don't really like this. Okay, so what? We've already gone over most of this stuff, but learning trends. So the point of this slide is to take a step back for a second and say, well, so what? Okay, so we have iPads, learning community, and everything is connected. These kids have to worry about actuating their own learning and self-directing their own learning, and they have the universe in their laps. And so we have all these learning things, and some that are good, blessings, some that are not. So what's the point? That's a good question. At this point, I'm going to look real quick at three main main areas, I guess you could say, of your classroom, and it's going to be kind of traditional. And a little bit what I'm talking about. We're going to talk real quick about curriculum assessment and instruction, but not necessarily on a collegiate level. I'll go quick. The idea
is, because it doesn't sound as exciting to me, about it. I used to work curriculum. Is that, I don't think this is kind of exciting, it's kind of not. You think about curriculum, think cool, and you think, oh God. But anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what are the characteristics of an iPad-friendly curriculum. What are the characteristics of an iPad-friendly, or of iPad-friendly instruction, and what are the characteristics of iPad-friendly assessment? And I know I'm shoehorning a lot of information here. You'll be able to download this presentation and email me if you ever have any questions. But curriculum is an iPad-friendly curriculum is adaptive. So you think a little bit about your favorite unit or your favorite lesson. Is it adaptive? What does that mean? What does an adaptive unit look like? Can it respond to changes in data that you weren't expecting? Can your unit is adaptive if it can respond to learner choice, if it can respond to technology disruption, if it can respond to students pursuing understanding that you may not have planned for. So you can, your curriculum is adaptive if it can respond almost on its own. If you've designed it so that students don't navigate the rat maze, but students pursue knowledge actuated by the stuff that you spend a lot of money on, or your district did. iPad-friendly curriculum is also dynamic. It's less static. It changes. You can't teach the same unit that you did last year, and the year before, and the year before, or even last semester. It should be dynamic. It should be alive with information. Teachers, I know I do anyway. I typically thought of a unit as a collection of, I'm an English teacher, so a collection of texts and media with surrounding projects and assessments. So I had this unit where we talked about, this poem and this movie, and I had to do this project, and then I had to write these on-demand prompts, and so I thought about it from a teacher's point of view. But in reality, a 21st century unit should be a lot different than that. A 21st century unit should be alive, changing, almost like the digital rain on the matrix, where it's just sort of indicative of this constant change and run and humming of activity and change and access. And what am I talking about? Well, I'd have to show you a different slide, but in reality, something like this should be dynamic. It also should be digital. It doesn't mean it can't be physical, but an iPad-friendly curriculum will be adaptive, dynamic, and digital. What do I mean by digital? Well, I wrote here, promoting belonging, collaborative project planning via apps in 5 days, 6 weeks. Digital presentations through apps like Prezi, curating of complex digital portfolios, and then socializing the work in those portfolios with networks that the kids actually care about. That's just something you chose with them. So those are the characteristics of an iPad-friendly curriculum. This is all very general, I know. These are people on iPads. Assessment. We'll go a little bit quicker on this one. Assessment is authentic. So it's more authentic, it's less academic. And you might notice this is the hallmarks of good assessment regardless of the presence of an iPad. It's more authentic, less academic. It's more frequent, informative, and less dramatic in some areas. You've got the test, and you go study for the test, and here's how you did on that test, and I remember this test. That's dramatic. You're installing a sense of drama that I'm sure feels good because that's what the real world's like. You have a test and you have to do well. But if we think of things that are student-centered, causing a huge amount of drama for an 8th grader to take a test about a standard they probably don't care about, it's probably not student-centered, right? What you're trying to, an assessment, a good assessment, should not, the way I think of assessment anyway is, an assessment should uncover what a kid understands. So sometimes it's not so much that they fail the assessment, sometimes the assessment fails them. You've designed an assessment that has left something on the table. They understood more than they showed on the assessment. Well, then that's the assessment's fault. It's not their fault. They know more. You design this assessment like a magnifying glass to see what they understand. And it looks like they don't understand anything. So we remediate and we put them in another class and we have them do something else. Maybe they did understand, maybe the assessment failed them. So, and then finally, another characteristic of iPad assessment is that it's fluid. So it's less obsessed with standards and proficiency and more obsessed, I guess you could say, with being connected, with understanding the self-actuating learning process, the transfer of understanding. And as teachers we're taught, we're coached, we're brainwashed, we're conditioned is standards backwards. Everything is standards-based, everything is research-based. And there's nothing wrong with basing what you do on standards and research, but in reality, standards and research are why kids come to school. That's something that's easy to forget. Instruction is student-centered. You hear a lot about that, and that's one of those empty phrases almost. Is this student-centered? Well, I don't know. But in reality, student-centered instruction is going to be iPad friendly because you're giving them a device that lets them actuate more than you can actuate for them. So what you should do, whatever you've got planned for them, should be student-centered. It's less to you or your school or the way your school does it or the way you do it, and it should be more open and flexible to the way the student wants it. Kind of the spirit behind BYOD, which has its shortcomings as well. But the way BYOD is to bring in a phone and use the app and phone and device that you're comfortable with on a network that will provide you just figure it out, that's the way learning should go. That doesn't mean that's all learning will eventually become. But I think you're going to see over the next 20 or 30 years, you'll see the schools and the role of schools shift, change slowly. You start to see schools 20, 30 years from now will be doing something differently. They probably will be more focused on literacy and less focused on content. I guess iPad-friendly instruction is student-centered, less uniform. A lot of teachers are responding to all this pressure to perform. They're responding by wanting everything to be the same. I want this teacher in this hallway and this teacher in this hallway to do the same thing at the same time, the same day, and you need to collaborate and you need to be a team player, and your unit should look like her unit, should look like his unit, and when you bring the data, it should all have to be the same. And because it makes it easy on administrators and superintendents and schools. If everybody's doing the same thing, the same day, the same way, you can add it up if you want. I remember hearing that comment. Well, you can just do the same thing she's doing, teach the same poem, the same assessment, the same literacy strategy, but jazz it up. Wow. I mean, you've taken all the choice away from me and also from the students themselves. So I don't know how much jazzing it up I can do. Diverse, and then also characteristic of iPad instruction is focused on transfer. Transfer is the ability to use information in a new and unfamiliar and unscaffolded situation. So, okay, you can tell me what this content string means. You can tell me what office purpose means, for example, or you can tell me what an isosceles triangle is. But you know why that information is valuable, and can you use it unprompted in the situation that I've set up for it. So I'm going to teach it. If you look at the graduate release responsibility model, show me. I'm going to show you what an isosceles triangle is. And I'm going to kind of help you use them, and then I'm going to let you go and see what you can do. Well, if you haven't scaffolded that let you area, well then you're offering opportunity to transfer. Sometimes that's what good learning design is. It's you help them, you show them to model it, you help them a little bit, or you have their friends help them, or you have global networks help them, and then you just let go, and you see what happens. Does the building topple or whatever? It's okay if it falls, go back up, and you let go, and you see what happens. And that's transfer. And that's the ability to let students, then you'll know a student can do something on their own without you standing over the shoulder, tapping them or reminding them or prompting and probing and that great stuff that we're told to do. Connectedness, networks, ecology, social, collaboration, crowdsourcing, visibility, what do these words mean? I'm kind of short on that, mercifully. But these are some of the characteristics of the 21st century learning environment. In 1972, a student did not need to understand, their network was up as far as they could walk or yell. And then now the networks, they're probably I'm exaggerating to say they're global, because most kids don't have a global network. Most kids have, 100 friends on Facebook, and 99 of them are from the school that the students they see in this hallway. So it's not like it's kind of exaggeration to say students are connected everywhere. They're really not, but they can be, and some of them are. So connectedness, how does that change learning? Networks. Kids have access to networks that can do more than you can. You have expertise, you have training, you have so much that you can do. But in trying to do it all, you end up doing very little. So if you can use an iPad to set a student loose or connect them with a network of people that threads, or whether it's war and push-pull factors and integration, or whether it's thematic development across digital media and non-digital text, whether it's some, if you can let them loose in a network where people care about that kind of content just as much as you, well, then they're going to do your job for you. And they're going to do it more powerfully than you could because you're just a teacher. There's a tension between you and your students, but it's not the same tension, not the same creative tension that can exist elsewhere. There's a creative tension is kind of necessary for learning. There has to be some sort of, that's why you can't be best friends with your students, because there needs to be a little bit of creative tension. Well, that same tension is available writ large across global networks all across the world. If you let students plug into the iPad. Outsourcing, visibility, blah, blah, blah. Characteristics of the digital learning community. You don't have to really go over this. I'm running out of short time, but this is moves from left to right. So content regulated, learner as passive receiver, sit and get passive, all the way to emergent strengths, co-created, adaptive, diverse, integrated, mutual relationships, and every school and every teacher in every classroom in every state, they have teachers come all along this grade. This can be done well, and this is where education is focused on steady and get. And the reality is your iPad opens up a huge universe, and it's extending off them forever. This is just one snapshot. Digital learning communities, those are powerful strategies for learning with iPads. What are some takeaways here? So flexible curriculum, frequent assessment, digital forms, networks, and connections. We're not going to go over this either, but this is I don't know if you want to call it a model. But it's basically what the characteristics of 21st century learning is. Media-driven, transfer by design, it's data-rich, it's adaptive, learner-centered, it's visible, relevant, and it's diverse. Inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, all the terms that we've been given in our life. These are just a few questions. Okay, 2 or 3 questions. What are the goals for iPad implementation? These are the kinds of questions that you ask yourself, and administrators might force you to ask them at a PLC meeting. But in reality, it's really important that you can internalize this for yourself, and this can help you transform the way you plan instruction in your classroom. Because you think, well, what are the goals for the iPad? What should this iPad do? And then this might actually be a better question. What learning problems does the iPad solve? So instead of thinking, how can I take my curriculum and shoehorn an iPad and make it look good? Well then, all right, well let's think of everything is a function, cause, effect. What does this thing do? Well, if the iPad is going to be successful, it has to solve a problem. So what sorts of problems existed in your classroom that are probably invisible to you, or you would have tried to address in other ways? What kinds of problems exist in your classroom? And then you look at the iPad as sort of the problem solver. Well, kids can't access community. Well, here you go. Kids can't navigate and self-direct their own learning. Well, here you go. I need an adaptive learning app that responds in real time to the way students perform on certain assessments. And the app has to do it because I've got 35 kids and I can't do it. I can't reasonably personalize instruction for 35 kids in a way. I'll do the best I can, but I kind of assuming it's like a skill-based time. And what style of learning are you expecting the iPad to activate? That's an important question, too. If I didn't talk so much, this would be a turn your elbow for that. And how should your instructional design and lesson plan be revised as a result of the iPad? So what changes? These are big questions. But until you consider these macro level questions, what's learning, what's understanding, what do I expect as understanding, how do kids activate the lessons that result in understanding, and what does the iPad change in result? If you can't consider or begin to internalize those kind of questions, then it is possible that the learning results that you get from them will always be somewhat compromised. So those even cool stuff with the iPad, instead of having students learn deeply and think critically, and being able to self-direct and transfer understanding consistently on a daily basis. This is an iPad Spectrum that I designed when I was at another website about a year and a half ago. And it's basically, what kind of stuff can kids do? But what kind of stuff can kids do with an iPad? Well, okay, so Terry, you're talking in very vague, esoteric rhetoric. Okay, so I'm talking very kind of stuff. So what exactly can they do? Well, they can monitor multiple Twitter streams, hashtags, and app responses to tweet deck. They can plan necessary private details in Wonderlist. They can backwards plan projects and related due dates using iCalendar. They can aggregate constant information streams to skim as RSS readers and social readers. They can live log a personal or academic event with Story Drive. They can demonstrate the spread of philosophical ideas using Google Maps. They can listen to podcasts and gain context on an issue of research for debate with Downcast. They can crowdsource implicit themes for character development and study the novel with Emoto. They can reflect on the cognitive process through a unit or project using representative images from Flickr. These are just some ideas. This is available on TeachThought. All this stuff is from TeachThought. So if you ever want any other to see any of it again, you should be able to find it there. This is my last one. What my last one? Yes, it is. And this is a point that might help you, but it helped me kind of release the learning. Because I struggled for a couple of years trying to shoehorn technology in, and then I gave up. And then things changed once I gave up. I said, forget it, I can't, this isn't working the way I wanted. And there was a reason why. Deep integration of technology should naturally disrupt most learning, most closed learning environments. So most classrooms should initially suffer from the deep injection and integration of technology. Just think what you're doing. You're changing everything. You're giving students toys that can do what you want to do, what you want to do with them, how they're doing it. It should change everything. It's like dumping. It basically changes the whole ecology of learning. Learning is an ecology of student experiences and technology and self-efficacy and can understanding. What is your expertise and how much do you love your content? How much time do you have to plan? This is giant ecology. And deep integration of technology will disrupt all that. And so our natural response as teachers is go, no, wait, just use this app to do this and show this and publish this. They say, just do that because it's easier. And I think you'll really see the iPad start and other tablets start to change learning once we stop that knee-jerk reaction of trying to restrict because we freak out because our classroom is being messed up. And that's not what I asked you to do. No, why are you coding that app? I didn't ask you to code an app. I told you to write this essay. Well, then let's embrace the way they code apps and how the iPad. That's really it. Good assessment strategy, by the way. This is the last thing we do, but I think I'm sure I'm not going to it. But a good assessment strategy that you can use at any time is have students ask the question. You always use this on exit slips. You can have them do it verbally. You can have them do it as they walk out the door. But if you force a kid to ask a question, so you see anybody have any questions? No, I'm fine. I got this. No, you don't. But maybe 3 kids might. Well, you force them. You have to ask a question. The types of questions that people ask are indicative of what they understand. You can tell a lot about somebody's understanding about the question that they ask. So a really simple, quick, effective assessment strategy is to have a student ask a question. Well, ask me a question on exit slip, leave them on autopilot here, and walk out the door. I'll be able to look through them and see, wow, this kid really understands and this kid really doesn't, or I never even thought of that. So what I'm going to do is have a student ask a question about any of the topics we talked about today. And then use the hashtag TL iPad, and then you can add messages to TeachThought, and I'll see them and respond to them when I get home. Just wanted to give you something concrete. I'm at 44 minutes and 15 seconds, so I'm short. Any questions? All right. Thank you.